You almost threw it out. That jar at the back of your fridge, the bread going hard on the counter, the eggs you were sure had turned. You almost tossed all of it in the trash, the same way I did, standing in my kitchen at 71 years old, watching money I didn't have slide into a garbage bag. That night, I nearly learned the most expensive lesson of my life. Because the truth is this: the food you throw away every single week could be feeding you for another 10 days, and the reason you don't know how to save it is that somebody made very sure your parents stopped teaching it. Everything that pulled me back from the edge came from a forgotten method, kitchen knowledge that was common in 1932 and nearly extinct by 1980. And at the end of this, I'm going to hand you the one that saved me most. A 100-year-old egg trick written down in a United States government bulletin. A trick that let me keep 24 eggs fresh for 7 months without a refrigerator. You can do it this weekend, in the kitchen you already have, on the budget you already live on. Let me take you back to that night, because I remember it in my hands. I was scraping a pot of soup into the trash. My wife had passed the year before, and I was cooking for one and failing at it, throwing out half of everything I bought. I remember the smell of the coffee I'd let go stale, and the little pile of green potatoes I'd sprouted in the cabinet. I stood there and did the math out loud, and my own voice scared me. I was spending close to $400 a month on groceries and putting a third of it straight in the bin. On a fixed income, that's not waste. That's the difference between paying the heating bill and not. That was the moment I got frightened enough to go looking backward. Because here's what I want you to sit with before we go one step further. The average American household throws away about 1/3 of the food it buys. The Department of Agriculture put that number between 30 and 40% of the entire food supply. For a family, that's somewhere near $1,600 a year walking out the door in a trash bag. And for those of us living alone, on a check that doesn't grow, that waste isn't a statistic. It's fear at the end of the month. So I did what my mother would have done. I went and found her methods, and I want to walk you through them the way I found them, slowly, one at a time, because each one gave me back a little more of what I thought I'd lost. The first thing I had to unlearn was the date stamped on the package. Let me tell you what almost happened. I had a quart of milk with a date that had passed by 2 days, and my hand was on the trash can lid. I stopped, because something my grandmother used to do came back to me. She never trusted a printed date. She trusted her nose and one small test. So I took that milk and I poured a single drop into a clear glass of cold water. Fresh milk sinks to the bottom in a little cloud and holds together. Spoiled milk breaks apart and mixes as it falls. That drop sank clean. The milk was fine. I drank it for 4 more days. Here's the part that made me angry once I understood it. Those sell-by and best-by dates are not safety dates. They are not federal law for most foods. Except for infant formula, the government does not require them at all. They were pushed into the grocery world back in the 1970s as a marketing and stock rotation tool, a way for stores to manage shelves. A study out of Harvard and the Natural Resources Defense Council in 2013 found that this confusion over date labels is one of the single biggest drivers of food waste in this country. 90% of Americans throw food away too early because they misread a date that was never about safety in the first place. Read that back to yourself. 90%. You have almost certainly thrown away good food this month because of a number a company printed to protect itself, not you. But knowing the date is a lie only got me so far, because the harder problem wasn't the food I threw out too early, it was the food that actually went bad before I could eat it, and that is where the real forgotten skill lives. Let me tell you about the eggs, because eggs nearly cost me a small fortune in a way you'd never guess. I was buying eggs, using 4, and throwing out the rest when I got nervous about them. So the first thing I relearned is the test my grandmother did without even thinking. You take an egg and you set it in a bowl of cool water. If it lies flat on the bottom, it's fresh as morning. If it stands up on one end but stays down, it's older but perfectly good. Use it today. If it floats to the top, then and only then do you let it go. That float test is real science. As an egg ages, moisture leaves through the shell and an air pocket grows inside. More air, more float. It's not a guess. It's physics you can do in your own sink for free. That alone stopped me throwing out good eggs. But it didn't answer the bigger question that had been nagging me. How did people keep eggs before there was a refrigerator in every kitchen? Because there was a time, not that long ago, when a hen laid plenty in spring and summer and almost nothing in the cold months, and a family still had to eat eggs in January. They didn't have a store on the corner. They had a method, and that method is the one I'm saving for the end, because it's the one that changed everything for me. So hold on to that thought. First, I had to face the villain in all of this. And I want to be careful here, because I'm not a man who blames the world for his own mistakes. But the more I dug, the more I saw a pattern, and it made me furious. Somewhere between my mother's kitchen and mine, this knowledge was deliberately allowed to die. Think about it. There is no profit in you keeping eggs for 7 months without buying anything. There is no profit in you reviving stale bread instead of tossing it and buying a fresh loaf. There is no money to be made teaching you that the date on the yogurt means almost nothing. The entire modern food economy is built on you buying more, sooner, and throwing away faster. When food companies started stamping those dates in the 1970s, waste in American homes climbed, and sales climbed right along with it. That is not an accident. A society that knows how to preserve its own food is a society that buys less, and a society that forgot how is a customer for life. Our grandparents were not customers for life. They were self-reliant, and that self-reliance was quietly inconvenient to a lot of people who'd rather sell you a solution every week. So the knowledge got left out of the cookbooks, dropped from the home economics classes, replaced with convenience. And here we are, 2 generations later, standing over a trash can, paying for the forgetting. So let me give you the methods they took from us, one at a time. Start with bread, because bread is where most of us lose the most. I used to buy a loaf, eat half, and watch the rest go hard as a brick. Then I remembered watching my grandmother do something that looked like magic. She'd take a loaf gone stale and dry, run the whole thing very quickly under the cold water tap, just a second, just to dampen the crust, and then put it in a hot oven, around 300 degrees, for about 10 or 12 minutes. It came out with a crackling crust and a soft, warm center, like it was baked that hour. Stale bread is not spoiled bread. Stale simply means the moisture has migrated and the starches have recrystallized. The heat and that little bit of water reverse it. You can bring a 2-day-old loaf back from the dead for the cost of running your oven for 10 minutes. And here's how you stop it going stale in the first place, which nobody tells you. Never keep your bread in the refrigerator. The refrigerator is the fastest way to make bread go stale, because that recrystallizing of the starch happens quickest at cold fridge temperatures, faster than on your counter. If you want to keep bread longer, the freezer is your friend, not the fridge. Slice it first, freeze it, and pull out what you need. My grandmother kept her bread in a box on the counter with a cut apple or a stalk of celery tucked in beside it to hold the moisture just right. That's not folklore. The apple releases a little humidity and keeps the loaf from drying out. That trick saved me maybe $15 a month by itself. But bread was the easy one. The thing that really turned my kitchen around was learning what my mother did with the parts of food the rest of us throw straight in the garbage. Because here's the truth that shamed me. I was throwing away the most nutritious, most flavorful, most valuable part of nearly everything I bought. Let me be specific, because vague advice helped nobody. The green tops of carrots, the leaves of celery, the stems of broccoli, the ends of onions, the outer leaves of cabbage, the peels of potatoes, the bones from a chicken, all of that went in my trash for years. My grandmother would have been horrified. She kept a bag in the freezer, and every scrap of vegetable trimming went into it. When the bag was full, she made stock: onion skins, carrot ends, celery leaves, a few herb stems, the chicken bones, into a big pot with water, simmered low for a couple of hours, strained, and there it was. Rich golden broth that cost $3 or $4 a box at the store, made entirely from things I'd been paying to throw away. During the Great Depression, this wasn't a hobby, it was survival. There's a whole body of home economics writing from the 1930s built around what they called using the whole animal and the whole plant. The government printed pamphlets teaching families to stretch every pound of food because there wasn't another pound coming. My grandmother lived through that, and she carried it into a world of plenty because she never trusted the plenty to last. She was right not to. And this is where I have to stop and talk to one of you directly. Maybe you're sitting there thinking all of this sounds fine for people who still cook big meals, who have a family around the table, who have money to stock a freezer and a pantry. Maybe you live alone, like I do now. Maybe your income is a fixed check and every dollar is already spoken for before it arrives. Maybe you're afraid this video is really for people better off than you. I put this next part in the script specifically for you, because you are exactly the person these old methods were invented to protect. Not the wealthy. The wealthy never needed them. These were the survival tools of people who had nothing, and they work best when you have the least. So here is what you can do today, this afternoon, with nothing you don't already own and not $1 spent. Take a look in your vegetable drawer right now. Anything going soft, a wrinkled carrot, a limp stalk of celery, a bendy cucumber, is not garbage. A vegetable goes limp because it lost water, not because it went bad. Cut off an inch of the base and stand it up in a glass of cold water in your fridge for a few hours, and it will drink that water back and turn crisp again. Limp carrots, celery, greens, even a tired head of lettuce, all of it revives. I have brought back vegetables I would have sworn were done for. And if this way of thinking, questioning the dates, trusting old knowledge, taking back control of your own kitchen, already resonates with you, I want you to know I've gone much deeper into all of it in my book, Smart Starts. It's where I gathered the methods that didn't fit into a single video, the step-by-step guides, the storage charts, the Depression-era techniques I found in those old government bulletins, written out so you can use them today without hunting through archives. If you want the full toolkit in one place, you'll find a link in the description below. But right now, let's keep going, because knowing the date is a lie only got me so far. Next, that half onion drying out in your fridge. Rub the cut face with a little oil or butter, or press it against a plate, and it stays fresh far longer, because you've sealed the surface from the air that dries it. Costs nothing. And your coffee, if you're like me and you buy the ground coffee and it goes flat and stale in the can, keep it in the freezer in a sealed container and only take out what you need. The cold and the seal hold the oils that carry the flavor. I was buying a new can because I thought the old one had gone bad. It hadn't gone bad. It had just gone stale from sitting open, and stale is fixable. None of that costs a penny. All of it puts money back in your pocket by the end of the week. And every bit of it came straight from people who had less than any of us and still ate well. But saving what you have is only half the battle. The other half, the half that truly frightened me when I understood how close I'd come to losing it, is knowing how to keep food safe so it doesn't hurt you. Because there's a darker side to all this waste, and it nearly landed me in the hospital. Let me tell you about the potatoes. I had a bag of potatoes in a low cabinet, and they'd started to sprout and turn green in patches. I was about to just cut off the sprouts and cook the rest, the way I always had. But something stopped me, a warning my grandmother used to give that I'd half forgotten. She always said never eat the green on a potato. Turns out she was dead right, and it's not superstition. That green color signals a compound called solanine, a natural toxin the potato produces when it's exposed to light. Eat enough of it, and it can make you genuinely sick. Nausea, headache, worse. The old rule was simple. Store potatoes in the dark, cool, and dry, never in the light. And if a potato is green under the skin, cut that part well away or throw it out. She kept hers in a paper sack in the coolest, darkest cabinet, never in a clear bag on the counter. I'd been storing mine wrong my whole life and calling it normal. And here's a pairing our grandparents knew that I'd never once heard. Never store potatoes and onions together. They each give off gases and moisture that make the other spoil and sprout faster. Kept apart, both last for weeks longer. Together they rot. Two items nearly every one of us keeps side by side in the same bin, quietly ruining each other, and nobody told us. That scare with the potatoes woke me up to something bigger. I'd spent my whole life trusting that if food looked fine, it was fine, and throwing away food that looked odd but was perfectly good. I had it exactly backwards. My grandmother could tell the difference by knowing her food, and that knowledge is what kept her safe and kept her fed. I'd traded that knowledge for a printed date and a nervous nose, and it was costing me both money and safety. So let me give you the safety checks the old-timers used, the ones worth more than any date on a box. For meat and fish, they trusted smell and touch, not the label. Fresh meat has almost no strong smell. When it turns, you'll know. It's sour and sharp and unmistakable, and the surface goes tacky and slick. If it smells clean and feels dry to firm, it's good, date or no date. For canned goods, the rule was never eat from a can that bulges, hisses when you open it, or spurts. Those are signs of gas from bacteria inside, and that one can be truly dangerous. But a dented can with no bulge and no rust on the seam is almost always perfectly fine, and stores throw those out and sometimes sell them cheap. A can of vegetables, kept cool and dry, is good for years past the date printed on it. Years. Now I promised you the one that saved me most, and we're close. But before I give it to you, I need you to understand why it matters so much, because the stakes are higher than a few dollars. Everything I've told you so far, the bread, the broth, the reviving vegetables, all of it buys you time and money. But the deepest fear for people our age isn't just money. It's the day you can't get to the store. It's the winter storm that keeps you home for a week. It's the stretch at the end of the month when the check is gone and the cupboard is thin. It's the quiet fear of depending on a system that might not show up for you. My grandmother's whole generation lived with that fear as a fact of life, and they answered it with one skill above all others. They knew how to store food for the long haul without a refrigerator, because they didn't always have one. And the crown jewel of that skill, the thing I found buried in an old government document that stopped me cold, is how they kept eggs. Here it is. The method is called water glassing, and I found it written out plainly in a United States Department of Agriculture Farmer's Bulletin from the early 1900s, the kind of document that used to be mailed free to every farm family in America. It was so common that it appeared in the Boston Cooking School cookbook and in almanacs and homemaking guides right through the 1940s. Then refrigeration spread, and it vanished so completely that most people under 80 have never heard the words. This is what you do. You take fresh, unwashed eggs, and unwashed matters, because a fresh egg comes with a natural coating called the bloom that seals the shell, and washing it strips that protection away. You get a food-grade mineral called sodium silicate, which is the water glass itself, sold cheaply and still available today. You mix 1 part of it into 9 parts of cool boiled water. You place your clean, unwashed eggs into a crock or a large glass jar, and you pour the solution over them until they're covered by an inch or two. You put a lid on loosely, set it in a cool spot like a basement or a bottom cabinet, and you walk away. Those eggs will keep for 6 months and longer, not in a refrigerator, in a jar, in a cabinet, through an entire winter. People tested this for generations. The Department of Agriculture ran the trials and put the numbers in print over 100 years ago. The sodium silicate seals every pore of the shell, locks the air out, and the egg simply waits for you. When I first read that, I sat back in my chair and I felt something shift. Because I'd been standing over that trash can afraid of a couple of eggs going bad in a week, and here was proof that my great-grandmother could keep 2 dozen fresh through the dead of winter with a jar and a cheap mineral, no electricity, no store, no dependence on anyone. That is what was taken from us. Not a trick, a kind of freedom. I tried it that spring. I bought fresh farm eggs, unwashed, from a man down the road. I mixed my solution, I filled a glass crock, and I set it in the coolest corner of my basement. And in October, 7 months later, I did the float test on one of those eggs, and it lay flat on the bottom of the bowl, like it had been laid that morning. I cracked it into a hot pan, and it stood up firm and golden. I stood in my kitchen, and I laughed out loud, alone, because I finally understood what my grandmother knew that I never did. If you can't find unwashed eggs or the mineral, there's an even older version of the same idea that costs almost nothing. Our great-grandparents also preserved eggs by coating each one in a thin layer of lard, or in some places a food-safe oil, sealing the shell by hand and packing them small end down in a box of salt or sawdust. Same principle, seal the pores, keep out the air, and the egg keeps for months. The wealthy of that era paid for ice boxes. The rest of the country used a crock and a little know-how, and they ate just as well. That is the secret the whole night was building toward. The reason I nearly threw away money I couldn't afford to lose was that I had been raised in a world designed to make me forget the one thing my own family knew, that food is not disposable, that the date is not the truth, and that a person who knows how to keep his own food can never quite be made helpless. Let me pull it all together for you, because I don't want you to lose a single piece of it. Stop trusting the printed date and start trusting the water glass drop test for your milk and the float test for your eggs. Revive your stale bread in the oven instead of buying a new loaf, and keep your bread out of the fridge and in the freezer for the long term. Save every vegetable scrap and every bone in a freezer bag and turn it into broth you'd otherwise pay for. Revive your limp vegetables in a glass of cold water. Keep your potatoes dark and dry and away from your onions, and never eat the green. Trust your nose and your hands on meat, and don't fear a dented can that isn't bulging. And when you're ready to feel the kind of security our grandparents felt, water glass a crock of fresh unwashed eggs and keep them through the winter without plugging in a single thing. Every one of those methods was common knowledge in 1940. Every one of them was nearly gone by the time it was my turn to learn them. And every one of them is still sitting there, waiting, in the old bulletins and the old cookbooks, for anyone willing to go looking. I almost lost more than money that night. I nearly gave up the belief that I could take care of myself. And for a person my age, once that belief goes, a lot of other things start to go with it. What these forgotten methods gave me back wasn't just the third of my grocery money I'd been throwing away. It was the feeling that I am not at the mercy of a store, a date stamp, or a company that profits every time I forget. That feeling is worth more than all the savings combined. And I think you're the kind of person who feels the same way. I think you clicked on this because some part of you already suspected that the people who came before us knew things we were never taught, and that the forgetting wasn't an accident, but a convenience for someone selling us the replacement. You're the kind of person who would rather know how to save the egg than be afraid of it. That's not old-fashioned. That's the most independent thing a person can be. So let me ask you one thing, and I really do want your answer. Out of everything tonight, the milk drop test, the potato and onion warning, the stale bread trick, or the water glass eggs kept for 7 months in a basement crock, which one did your own mother or grandmother do that you'd completely forgotten until just now? Tell me in the comments. Tell me what she kept in that crock or that cabinet, because those little memories are exactly the knowledge that's disappearing, and when you write it down, you keep it alive for the next person scrolling past. If you want more of these, the real ones, the buried ones, the methods from the old bulletins, and the Depression kitchens that the modern world was happy to let us forget, then come along with me. This isn't about following a channel. It's about a group of us quietly picking these skills back up before the last people who remember them are gone. Because next time, I'm going to show you how our grandparents kept butter fresh on the counter for weeks without any refrigeration at all, using nothing but a bowl, some water, and one thing you already have in your kitchen right now. And once you see how simple it is, you'll wonder, the same way I did, how we ever let ourselves forget. Now, this video gave you the overview, but there's more. Inside the Wise Living Circle, I walk you through every method, step by step for your kitchen, including that egg trick that saved me. When you get stuck, you can ask me directly, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. Folks like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. Cancel any time, one click.